Okay, folks, we're considering the question on the board. We're giving everybody a few minutes to answer this. So folks at home, if you're watching this, just think about this question. We're going to talk about it here in just a few minutes. Okay, go ahead and finish up what you're working on. Finish up your responses to that question. While you guys are finishing that up, I do want to finalize practice AP exam dates. Okay. As of now, even though it's really earlier than I've ever done it before, I'm leaning towards March the 11th. I think that meets the early date in terms of meeting the most students, like having the most availability. So as of now, I'm leaning towards 311, just like the band, and I'm leaning towards the 22nd of April. Does anybody have any input, any insight, any comments? Go ahead. Do you have any idea what time that would be, or because I mean it's not on the calendar, and I can't. If it's not on the calendar, I can't just like and right now. Okay. Okay. Well, and who is this again? This is who? Having a dance? Oh, winter formal. Okay. Well, here's your trade-off. Like, I try to avoid prom because I know for upperclassmen that's a really big deal. For the winter formal is usually a bigger deal for more people, especially underclassmen. Um, the test, the test for you guys should be done, and you guys should be on your way home no later than 11:30, 12. Could you still make the winter formal work? I'm hoping. I mean, it's not. I know it's a big deal, but it's not like prom where you spend all day doing whatever. Okay, so let's go ahead and lean towards the 11th. If you guys want to write that down, 311. You guys can plan on arriving here somewhere around 8:15ish. I will give you some more details. You are responsible for your own transportation. If you want to bring something to snack on, you're welcome to do that. Bring your own beverages. I won't control like AP does when you go into the room to take the AP test. You can't bring in food and bev. Um, but when you come into my classroom, that's fine. I don't care. And then you guys will be on your way by probably like it might even be like 11:15. It just depends on when everybody gets here, how fast we get going. It shouldn't take very long at all. So March 11th, 311, 8:15 ish, same time, 422, April 22nd. April 22nd obviously is a month and change later, all right, but it only gives you about 2.5 weeks to study, about 2 weeks to study, because you have through the end of April, and then we test that first week. So it's not a lot of prep time after the 22nd, but because of spring break being kind of later this year, those look like are going to be the best 2 dates. So make a note of those. And like I said, I want everybody to try to at least make one test if you guys choose to come. Not mandatory, but strongly recommended. Any questions? Everybody good? Any comments? Okay, well, hopefully you guys can make that work for at least one test, okay? Especially you first-time AP students. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, one other quick announcement before we get going. Starting next week, not this week, but next week, I am opening up my lunch bunch study sessions. This is an optional activity y'all can participate in. And what I do is I basically allow students to come in. You can come in by yourself. You can come in with a small group. If you come in with a large group, let me know ahead of time just so I can make sure we have enough space. Usually it's about 5 to 6 people per class period. But what this is you can go grab your lunch, or if you bring your lunch, you can come straight here. But if you come in during your lunch period and you work at studying and preparing yourself for your exam, your AP Psych exam, meaning you're going through your review book, you're going through your flashcards, whatever that might be, I will give you bonus points that you can apply anywhere you want in the third quarter. Now, every time you come in, it's not going to be a massive point. All right. It's going to be a half a point every time you come in. But if you come in like say you come in 1 day a week, that's going to be 4.5, 5 points of bonus. If you come in 1 day a week over the quarter, that's going to be 9 points that you can apply to a test, something like that. It adds up if you guys want to come in. The goal is to try to encourage you guys a little bit to come in and start preparing for your exam. Come in with friends. It's easy to study with friends. It's also easy to get distracted. But if you want to come in by yourself, you're welcome to do that. What I'll do is I'll have a sign-in sheet. You guys can go grab your lunch, then come back up here. You need to be here a majority of the period, though. And I know lunch lines can be a little slow, but that doesn't mean you go hang out with your friends for 25 minutes and you come back here for 5 minutes. Okay, you need to be here a majority of the period. So go grab your lunch, or if you bring your lunch, you can come straight here. As long as you're here for a majority of the room, majority of the lunch period, I'll give you your bonus points. AP Psych will have 2 days a week that you guys can come in. Okay, and basically what it's going to be is the days I see you guys in class. With the exception on the days that I see you 3 times a week, I'm going to reserve Friday for AP tutoring. Like, if you're struggling with my tests up to this point, like you don't score really well, but you know you study, I'm going to strongly suggest you start planning to come in on Fridays. Next week is a B week, so I see you guys 3 times. If you want to come in to study for your AP exam, you can come in Monday, Wednesday, and then I will host a non-mandatory AP level question session where I walk students through practicing on AP level questions, give you some strategies and some tips. Yes. Yeah. I wanted to get us back in the swing of things now that we're back. Quarter 3 is where we get a lot more into FRQ. So, all right. Does anybody have any questions? Everybody understand? I have it up on the board up there on the far side over by my desk. So next week would be Monday, Wednesday for study on your own in my classroom during lunch, get your bonus points. Friday doesn't count towards bonus points, but if you want to come in and work on those questions, I'm happy to help you on an individual basis, or if we have several people come in, I'm happy to help you guys as a group. Okay? Okay. All right. So what do you guys think? Violent video games, banned, controlled, free reign. What do you think? What are some violent video games these days? I mean, I know you got like Grand Theft, but that's more from my day and age. What are some violent video games? You still have like Call of Duty, Halo, that sort of thing. I mean, it's not really like Halo's not a thing anymore. Okay. Okay. Well, what? But what's? I don't know. I mean, I don't really do the video game thing that much. What are some violent video games? You guys don't have any more, or you just don't play them because you're such good kids? Anybody? 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 You guys just don't want to fess up, or they just don't make them anymore. They make them. Okay, because I know like Grand Theft Auto was like it got raunchy. It's still a big thing. Great. All right, well let's just stick with Grand Theft Auto. What are your thoughts? Right. Okay. Okay. So we're putting a little more emphasis on the parents or whoever is responsible for the child. Like, say you go to a friend's house and you're 6, and that kid has. Because I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't have video games, but this is also like a long time ago. All right, we called it checkers. I'm just kidding. But you go to your friend's house and the parent has a certain view on letting their kid play, but you may or may not. So it falls on what you're saying is it falls on the responsibility of the parent or parents to have that conversation. Okay, I think it makes sense. Anybody else? I usually get some pro gamers that are like, I don't want any control at all, no regulation whatsoever. Yeah. Right. Well, that's really what I wanted to talk about, and I'm glad you're going that direction. So let's talk about that. Does taking part in violent video games, observing violence on TV, does that encourage violence? Let's just start with that very narrow focus. Not always. Okay, can you explain? Right. Okay, good. I like that interpretation. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is yes, there are stickers, yes, there's age ratings, but those ratings usually, I know there's like a little disclaimer that says discretion should be practiced or whatever, but like folks that do suffer from mental illness and maybe undiagnosed mental illness, there's really no parameter on that sticker that says if you have a mental illness, please don't play this game. Or not that that would do it, but it doesn't really address that type of a situation. It just says if you're 14 or 17 or whatever, you can or cannot play. It could have been. I mean, well, they're probably tired of getting sued. I mean, it may very well. I don't know. Like I literally, the last video game I bought was an N64. So you guys probably don't even know what that is. Okay. There was a couple other comments. Liv, go ahead. Okay. Okay. So instead, instead of, that's a good that's a good that's a good proponent of violent video games. It could provide a non-real outlet like an imaginary stress relief, and I think for some kids that could be a good route, possibly. T, what do you think? There's a psychological term that I want to talk about. What's that term? It starts with the D. Desensitizing. Yeah, desensitization. And that really is the data right now behind violent video games. Does it mean that if somebody plays a violent video game day in day out that they are going to go shoot up a school? No, it does not mean that. But what it does mean, the data tells us that observing or partaking in fictitious or non-real violence, whether it's through video game or watching a violent television program or TV or whatever, it does create a level of desensitization. But I think a lot of it, the data does point to the idea that it really boils down. It really boils down. That you like my effects there. It really boils down to the child themselves and their upbringing, their peer group, their parents. All of those factors go into that decision. But the data does tell us that observing and partaking in aggressive behavior is likely to perpetuate aggressiveness. It doesn't necessarily mean violence because aggression and violence are different. Usually, violence involves aggression, but not all aggression. A person can be aggressive without necessarily being violent, if that makes sense. Grace? Yeah, that's an interesting study right there. We got a little compare and contrast. So, what differences do you see? How old are these kids? Ballpark? 5, and they're playing violent video games at 5. Yeah, don't turn your back on them. Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, and the idea of exposure, and we actually use it in psychology as a therapy. Like people that have phobias, you say you're afraid of snakes, we can actually use computers and virtual technology to slowly expose people to that phobia if they want to get over it. But it also works the other way. Like there is strong data that says most people that go through or have experienced either violence, physical violence, emotional violence, not really violence, I guess, emotionally, but like emotional abuse, or play lots and lots of video games, there is a level of desensitization. Now, is it the same in every person? No, it does vary. But it's interesting, Grace, that you talked about that. How many of you babysit more than one family? Have you seen any of those? Do you see parenting styles that kind of mirror the kids' behaviors? Like a little more lackadaisical. We call that permissive parenting, where the kids are kind of permitted to do whatever they want to do. And then sometimes you get the authoritative parents that are like, my way or the highway. Actually, wait, those are authoritarian parents, and they're very super strict. But that also can result in a misbehaved child, but just not usually when the parents are around. Did you have something else to add? There was a couple hands. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You change the circumstances. You give if there's a mental illness that would increase the probability of something violent possibly happening, because there are statistics that can tell you, especially people with antisocial personality disorders, psychopathy and sociopaths, etc. Those kinds of people that don't have the right they have an impacted moral barometer, as I like to call it. Like they don't really know or care what right and wrong is. Those are the kind of people, and you can sometimes see it in younger children too, like torturing animals and things like that. If it doesn't really register as a bad thing to them, then their violent video games should definitely be restricted. But usually one of the connections is that parents that have children, and this doesn't apply to all, but usually the parents, there's a genetic factor, and usually the parents will display similar, at least one of the parents will display similar behaviors, and oftentimes that results in parenting that allows for those bad behaviors to become, I don't know, amplified. Excuse me. Right. I agree with that. But again, you can also look at it the other way around. Does that train some people, especially people that are more likely to display aggression or violent behavior? Does it show them that it's a little bit more okay because of the exposure, because of the repetition? Helene, what do you think? Yeah, yeah, it can have the opposite as opposite effect to a stress reliever. It actually can increase your stress sometimes, depending on the person. I think that was more me expanding on that. You said that. What did you say then? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I think a lot of it depends on how that individual interprets the elements of the game. But like Grand Theft Auto, some of your role playing games where you're playing first person, that's very realistic. You start throwing in dragons and stuff like that. The mind understands, and we're talking about a normal mind here. Like there are a lot of variations of a normal mind that can be more or less influenced by being exposed to to video games and the like. Yeah. How old's your brother? 8. Okay. Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Try to cut each other's heads off. Get over here. Yeah. I mean, some of it's natural. Like to reenact, like if you go back into the 50s, and I know this is terribly stereotypical, but like playing cowboys and Indians out in the backyard, granted, completely politically incorrect, but the point is that that's a typical thing, and it's part of childhood development. But again, it's that line between fiction and reality, and how far that line is it causing a blurring of the line for some children is I guess ultimately what we're looking at. And I think you can't really answer this question that I asked you guys to try to answer and apply it to all children, like, because every kid's going to be different. Parents play a role, friends play a role, their mental state of mind plays a role, their maturity level plays a role, their ability to separate fact from fiction. All of those elements play a role. Bye bye. Well, when you find that train, you let us know. All right. All right, guys. There is a brief little CBS news report that I've added as a video link. If you guys want to watch it, it basically just kind of talks about what we've talked about. The data does tell us that there is an increased tendency towards aggressive behavior, but that doesn't necessarily translate to violence. So, concrete linkage between violent video games and violence depends on the data you look at, and there's a lot of political pressure on either side because there's a lot of money behind video games and film and all of that. I haven't watched it in a minute. I just like make sure the link worked. It's been a minute. I think I want to say like 13, 14 sticks in my mind, but I'm not 100% sure. All right. Did you find that train? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Remember what the sun looks like. Yes. Okay. Good. I like that. I like that. Um, the takeaways on this whole topic, and the reason we're talking about this today is because the last module in our unit on learning deals with observational learning and imitation. And we're going to talk about how influential watching others do things can be to us. But in terms of violent video games, the parents, like we talked right off the bat, Tro, I think you brought it up first. Parents, your environment plays a really strong role, like letting kids play or not play. And Tegan, I think you brought it up as well, and a couple others. If you do it over and over again, it does have at least a minimal effect. Even if you're mature and you know right versus wrong or real versus fake, it will impact you ever so slightly. But people that have mental conditions or are susceptible to misinterpreting real versus fake oftentimes will be more prone to acting that out. Doesn't mean just because you play violent video games doesn't mean you're going to go shoot somebody or you're going to go punch somebody in the face. But it does usually it does increase your habituation or the idea that it becomes more normal. Now, does that translate to the real world or not? I think that's where we get into the individual. So that's it, guys, for the violent video games. That was a good discussion. Turn your paper over. This is just a quick little study guide. You don't have to do anything with this, but by the time you guys come back to test, and as of now, I'm planning on a test on Monday. All right, which means note cards due Monday. These are the elements that you need to really make sure you understand, okay? Make sure you know your experiments. We haven't talked about Bandura yet, but the rest of them we have. Little Albert, Pavlov and his doggies, and understand how Skinner manipulates the operant chamber. You don't need to know like exact elements in terms of like one exact experiment of Skinner versus another. You just need to know how he uses primary and secondary reinforcers, as well as punishments in the operant chamber to test his ideas on operant conditioning. Make sure you know your punishments and your reinforcements, positive, negatives. Okay. Make sure you know your reinforcement schedule. Okay. Yes. 26 through 30. 26 through 30. And then Garcia and Coling, taste aversion. Irradiated sugar water makes them sick and they will avoid it. Even normal sugar water that's not irradiated, even in the future. The Garcia effect talks about taste aversion, even if it's delayed. Like the illness doesn't happen in the rats for a couple hours, maybe even a day, because the radiation takes a while to make them sick. They still make that connection. And then just some general terms you guys need to make sure you know. I didn't cover every single vocab term, but just make sure you know them. I do have a Jamboard posted on Canvas. If you all want to add topics, you're welcome to do so. I know sometimes this block, you guys don't really have a ton of questions for me, but if you do, it's located in Canvas under modules, Unit 4 Learning. It's at the bottom, and you guys are 1B. So any questions? Everybody good? All right, let's go ahead and wrap up our last unit, which is Unit 4 on Learning. We left off at the very end of this unit. I think, have we covered self-control or not? Huh? Yes? Okay. All right, so we'll pick up right here with Module 30. All right, so Module 30 is different. This covers observational learning. It's different than associative learning because we're not associating two stimuli. We're not associating a consequence with an outcome, or like a punishment with a reward, or a behavior with a punishment, or a behavior with a reward. We're going to talk about these cool little things called mirror neurons. There are supercell clusters in our brain that allow us, even as young children, to imitate and mirror other people's behaviors. And I'll show you a few examples of how that happens in the real world. And then we'll talk about how pro-social and antisocial modeling, especially in parenting, can impact behavioral outcomes. And then the last thing is the violence viewing effect, which gets back to how we started the class with violent video games. Okay, Bandura. Write this down. Albert Bandura, he unfortunately just passed away in the last 5-10 years at the ripe old age of 90-something. But he gives us this idea and proves the idea of what we call observational learning, or learning through observing others. So before we go any farther, there are some key elements. There are some key elements to observational behavior. What do you need? Piece of paper? Is somebody getting you one? Okay, I'll grab you one. Is graph paper okay, Grace? Okay. So in observational learning, and this is kind of like common sense stuff, but there are some elements you guys just need to understand. So we have modeled behavior. Write that down, modeled behavior. Okay. This is the behavior that is being observed. Modeled behavior. Pretty self-explanatory. Okay, the next, we have imitation. Imitation. You guys know what imitation is, right? Imitation, you're imitating somebody's behavior. All right? You have to imitate that behavior. Pretty self-explanatory, yes. It's technically classified as observational learning. Like it's its own thing. Is it cognitive? Yes, but it's cognitive. When we look at cognitive, I want you guys to think more of like book learning. You know, like where you're forcefully trying to put new information in your brain, or reading. Like that's cognitive. This is it technically is a type of cognitive, but it's much more specific because it's done through mirror neurons and watching behaviors and then repeating those behaviors. Okay. Make sure you associate Albert Bandura or just Bandura with observational learning. He's kind of like, as you know, Skinner is to operant conditioning, Bandura is to observational. He got the U.S. National Medal of Science from President Obama back in, I think it was 2012. Okay, so we will not be watching the Bobo beatdown crash course. We are going to watch this 5-minute video clip of Bandura's actual study. So what I want you guys to do, sit back, relax, watch this video. This is an experiment that was conducted by Albert Bandura in the 1960s. Let's see if I can change my speaker here. I want to try to get this outputting to you guys so y'all can hear it. Uno momento, please. When we say novel, what does that mean? Just for clarity. New. Novel means new, or behaviors that the children had never observed before. That's important to know. This part gets really disturbing. Okay, the moral of the story is don't make that little girl mad. All right, what'd you guys think? Any comments? Were they ever deconditioned? That I don't know. But let me back up and explain. Like they didn't really talk about the trigger of the experiment. So the idea is this. So you just watched a video of the Bobo doll. The Bobo doll was a kid's blow up toy. I think I might even have had one when I was a kid. Yes, I'm that old. But the idea was this: children would be in an isolated playroom. Okay, and Bobo would be in a different room, probably that they were able to hear what was going on. And then what would happen is an adult, usually a female adult, sometimes a mother or a caregiver, would come into the room and demonstrate aggressive behavior as the children were playing in this adjacent room, watching, listening to the behavior that the mother or the caregiver was displaying. So they would observe this behavior. You saw it. The woman was like kicking and throwing Bobo, punching Bobo. Um, and then what would happen is the child, after the adult exited the room, um, the child would continue to play. They would bring Bobo into the adjacent room. And then what they would do is they would take away one of the toys that the child, like the favorite toy that the child was playing with. The child, as the trigger for those children that had observed the aggressive behavior from the adult, would then go and become aggressive towards Bobo. They would take what they saw from the adult who showed aggression and showed anger, you know, made vocalizations like, oh, I'm so mad or whatever. And then they took the behavior they observed and reenacted it and sometimes even elaborated on it. Like the little girl grabbing the baby doll and just beating Bobo with the baby doll, doll on doll. Like, um, ultimately, that was the gist of the experiment. But the idea and the experiment did prove that children, when observing novel aggressive behavior, are more likely to act and react aggressively later. And this shows us that right there. Children, the control was children that were never exposed to the adult's aggressive behavior. Bobo was in the room. And oftentimes, when the assistant would go in and take away the favorite toy, those children that had not been exposed to aggressive behavior simply, in most cases, would just select another toy and keep right on playing. Yeah, there was some gender alignment there. I don't know if there was a lot of males doing the beating part of the doll. I think it was pretty much all female, but girls did have a higher tendency to replicate the adult female aggressive behavior. Again, you're also talking 1960s. The idea of gender is completely different now. So, and it's much more fluid in this day and age. So that could impact. If you did the study again, it may be different. potentially. Now, this age group, the idea of gender may not be as pronounced, but anyway, it's interesting to think about. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Everybody good? Do you understand Bandura and the Bobo doll experiment? The crash course is good if you guys want a little bit of additional information, um, but we're not going to take the time to do that right now. Go away, you. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Maybe. All right, there we go. All right, so again, these are some of the highlight reels from what we already saw in the video. And again, the ultimate walkaway result, the result you guys will need to know is that children that observed aggressive behavior from an adult were more likely to act aggressively than those that did not. That's the takeaway. Don't worry too much about, if it was a girl or a boy or whatever. Like that's stuff above and beyond you won't need to know for the test. Okay. I want you to write down the word vicarious. You can write it on that sheet of paper or put it in your notes, whatever you guys want to do. You guys have probably heard the word vicarious. Vicarious simply means to do something through somebody else. For example, if you've ever been pushed into a sport, or if you've been pushed into maybe a major from a parent, they may, in a way, kind of be living vicariously through you. Have you ever heard that before? Living vicariously through someone else because they can't do or can't have what it is you have or you can do. That's what this is. And the idea of this is the vicarious reinforcement and vicarious punishment is what we learned from Bandura, because what was happening is the female actors that would come in and demonstrate that physical behavior, the child was vicariously learning through observation how to punish and how to reinforce. Okay, basically it's learning how to reward or punish through the actions of somebody else. Does that make sense? So oftentimes it's one of those situations where children don't actually have to do the action itself in order to learn it. They don't have to imitate it. They can actually just observe it and absorb that action. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, moving on. Mirror neurons. Mirror neurons allow us two very important things: imitation, and they also allow us to detect empathy and develop our own empathy. Mirror neurons are mostly located in our frontal lobe, near our optic nerves. And what they do is they allow us to learn by watching somebody else. I'm sure at some point in your educational career, maybe even this week, you guys have had a teacher that demonstrates something. Maybe in your art form, they teach you how to play the violin, or they teach you how to do a proper brush stroke on a canvas, or whatever the case might be. As you watch, you absorb that action and that behavior. Now, you may not be able to replicate it perfectly, but you do learn how to basically carry out that behavior. Okay, these are mirror neurons. All right, imitation. What's the kids game? Isn't there a kids game where you have to, well, like Simon Says, but that's not really, isn't there a kids game where you have to like follow somebody else, like do their actions, like where you go really fast, like clapping, or what is it? Maybe follow the leader. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, you guys understand what imitation is, to imitate somebody's behavior. Okay. It can be really irritating sometimes if you have a younger brother or sister that does everything that you do and repeats everything that you say. Again, that's imitation. Empathy, on the other hand, empathy is important, especially for humans. Humans and some higher level other mammals like primates show empathy. Dogs, horses, maybe even some other animals to a degree. Cats, maybe. But anyway, so empathy is our ability to feel the pain or sadness or the emotion of someone else. Usually we have a negative connotation. It's not always negative, but empathy allows us to to understand what somebody else is feeling. How do we detect those things, Darby? How do we detect if somebody is hurting, like emotionally? Okay, good. Yeah, humans are highly nonverbal. Even though we talk a lot, we're still highly nonverbal. A lot of the way we communicate is facial gestures, posture, the way we hold ourselves, the way we act, the way we move our eyes. You're talking thousands, if not tens of thousands, of varying expressions from a single person's face over the course of a minute. Okay, even me doing this right now, you can see my left eyebrow slightly raised to emphasize, importance. I don't know. Anyway, the point is that we all read each other's faces, and that helps us develop the empathy. And mirror neurons allow us to read postures and sadness and happiness and all of those other emotions. Make sense? Just make sure you understand what empathy is, our ability to feel others' emotions. Imitating can be adaptive too, given different environments. A study was done on humpback whales, and in the 1980s, they found one whale in a particular pod that was being studied that conducted a specific type of action when it was hunting. Okay, it was trying to stun the fish by using kind of a slap technique. They call it a lobtail now. But this was the first time it had been documented in 1980, and only one whale in this particular pod did it. But because the other whales observed this behavior, in a few years, the rest of the pod was doing the same behavior because it was so effective. So imitation can be adaptive or changeable or malleable. We're going to look at some monkeys here in just a second too. So these are vervet monkeys, and this was an actual experiment that was done in captivity. These vervet monkeys were trained to avoid the blue, I think it was corn. Was it corn or some sort of a food? Corn. It was corn. Corn was one of their main food sources, and they loved it. But researchers dyed one batch of corn pink and the other blue. As part of the blue corn, they also added a really bad tasting chemical that caused the monkeys to have a really bad taste in their mouth, which is kind of classical conditioning in a way, or taste aversion if you want to call it that. So all the monkeys in the troop avoided the blue corn. Here's where the imitation comes in. Out of the 27 baby monkeys that were born over the length of this study, only one of the 27 even tried the blue corn. The babies were not born when the troop learned to only eat the pink corn, but because the power of imitation is so strong, only one of the 27 infants even tried the blue corn, and probably only did it one time. Okay, so what that tells us is learning can take place through observation in the animal kingdom. All right, corn is a natural food. Well, it's probably not natural to vervet monkeys, but food in general is an enticement for monkeys. In this case, even though the blue corn was a food source, the rest of the troop demonstrated a behavior that the baby monkeys learned through imitation. Everybody good? Got it? Yes? Okay. All right, humans. This was a study that was conducted in the, it started off actually in the 80s and has been retested over and over again. This is a fairly famous series of pictures. And what you have is you have an infant, all right, an infant to into the toddler stage, 8 to 16-month-old child. And you have a female, probably a caregiver, probably mother, and then the baby. Across the table, you have another person. And then if you watch, if there's a connection made between the person on the right and the infant, and then the person on the right turns and looks, most of the time the baby will imitate that behavior and look. Okay, you guys could probably do this with a dog at home if you ever try that. Like, if you're just like, and you look that way, the dog oftentimes will look that way. All right, but humans, even at the age of not knowing a whole lot, at age 8 to 16 months, even young toddlers are able to imitate behavior. If you've ever held a fairly recent baby, maybe a couple months old, and you try to make facial gestures, oftentimes they will try to mimic your facial gestures, like, and sometimes they'll try to move their mouth to mirror yours. That's basically those mirror neurons kicking in and trying to develop the imitative behaviors that allow them to develop and to grow and become part of that social group. Questions? Okay. So this looks at the mirror neurons here. So what we see is this person right here has experienced the physical sensation of pain. This person is watching this person. These are the regions that become highlighted when this person is experiencing pain, which makes sense. This is mostly your somatosensory cortex in the very rear of the frontal lobe, right up against the temporal lobe. When we see somebody in pain, this part of our brain kicks in. All right. Now, it doesn't necessarily allow us to feel the sensation, but allows us to feel it causes the ability for us to relate to the sensation of pain. Okay. Have you ever been in a group of friends that, you walk up, you're all happy and you've got, good news, but somebody's crying in the group because something not awesome has happened? And then the rest of the group is very sad? No? Okay. Hello. Okay. It's not uncommon for humans to be influenced socially like that. And when we get into our unit on social psychology, you'll learn more about that. But this is important because it does deal with observational learning. So again, parts of the brain do become active that kind of mirrors the actual physical sensation of someone that's experiencing pain. Okay, the last couple things. Pro-social modeling, all right? The idea of pro-social modeling is when somebody models a behavior, it should benefit society. And that's kind of the very generic idea of pro-social modeling. Ultimately, because of imitation, because of mirror neurons, people that are around others that exemplify pro-social modeling will oftentimes be more pro-social themselves. Like if you have parents that, how many of you have parents that actively, or guardians that actively go out and like, will hold the door for an old woman, or if somebody drops something, we'll try to help. Most of us do, okay? And that's not uncommon. And that will probably most likely cause you guys to develop that same type of behavior. How many of you that have parents that do that do the same thing? Or at least you try to. Most of us, okay? So pro-social breeds pro-social, but it also works the other way around. Antisocial behavior or antisocial modeling also promotes antisocial behavior. Yes, yes. So remember when we talked about punishment a few modules back, we talked about the 4 major drawbacks. And I told you guys that aggressive behavior, punishing, oftentimes will fuel aggressive behavior and punishing, okay? Unfortunately, antisocial modeling, like excessive punishment, especially if it's not appropriate, oftentimes will cause children, even at the young age of like probably 2, 3, 4 years old, will even cause children at that age to resort to the behavior that is familiar to them. In this case, it happens to be antisocial. You can see this girl right here smacking the heck out of her baby doll, probably because she's been spanked herself, maybe even a bit too much or too hard or whatever. So again, antisocial also breeds antisocial. Questions? Okay, almost done. And then we'll get to a review. Okay, violence viewing effect. Again, this is what we talked about at the beginning of the class. If you are exposed to violent media over and over and over again, you do become desensitized. Okay, this is called the violence viewing effect. You do tend to habituate towards violence. That doesn't mean you will become violent necessarily. Some it will, most of us know. but you do habituate. Remember, like Aplysia, the sea slug, the more it got shot with the water gun, what happened? Its response became minimized. It became used to the spray, which makes sense. Okay. Then over time, it finally stopped responding to the spray. Same thing kind of happens when we look at violent media, video games, social media, whatever. Okay. Um, the more you see it, the more you're exposed to it, the more normal it becomes. Okay. All set. Good. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this? This is kind of it's kind of common sense, but important that you guys know that. Oh, whoa! What happened here? Okay, desensitization, again, another important term that some of you guys brought up that we talked about. Desensitizing does impact violent behavior. Again, exposure causes desensitization. We see this, like I said, in exposure therapy. People that are terrified of snakes or spiders or cats or dogs. I have a video that we'll look at down the road when we get into a different unit, when we look at phobias specifically. But there's this big, huge, muscle-bound, massive, tough-looking guy. They bring out a chihuahua, and he turns into this sobbing 6-year-old girl, and he just is like bawling his eyes out, terrified, screaming, because they bring a chihuahua that barely is moving out, and they bring it near him, and he just. But the whole point is exposure therapy. People that have phobias, it causes desensitization. You expose the person to their fear in controlled, slow, and then gradually increased volumes to desensitize them. That's, if you guys have phobias, that's how you can overcome them if you want to overcome them. For most of us, phobias aren't crippling. There are people that don't leave their house because of their phobias. And those people could benefit from desensitization. Okay? Possibly. All right. Blah, 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 blah. All right. So the findings of the American Academy of Pediatrics does say that media violence can contribute to aggressive behavior, desensitization, nightmares, and fear of being harmed. So it's the idea of, and the book relates it to advertising. Okay, a 30-second commercial sells a particular type of soap, and I know that's a stupid analogy, but whatever. The point is that when you watch 25 minutes worth of violence, or like play Grand Theft Auto, you have 25 minutes of exposure to that type of behavior, and it perpetuates itself to a degree. This might be a bit over dramatized, but again, the point is that when you're exposed, it does affect you in some way. Okay, last slide. Habituation, Aplysia, sea slug versus sensory adaptation. We talked about sensory adaptation when we talked about sensation and perception. These two terms are very, very related. I strongly recommend you write these down. Habituation is a relatively permanent change that involves a reduced response to a repeated but not constant stimulus. Okay? Again, when you think of habituation, I want you to think of Aplysia, the sea slug. Okay. Sensory adaptation, very related, very, very similar, but it's more dealing with our perception, not so much the sensation, for one, but it's a perceptual phenomenon that basically is reacting to a constant and unchanging stimulus. Okay? It's where our senses adapt. For example, if you were to wear those drunk goggles around for 2 days, you would get better at it. That's an unchanged, yes, after 24 hours you take off the goggles, but in that 24-hour period, it's an unchanging stimulus. Okay, your body, your senses would adjust to that, how it's perceiving the data coming in, even though when you look straight ahead, you're actually looking over here or up there or down there or whatever the case might be. All right, guys, that does it. I think that does it. We'll give everybody just a couple more minutes on this one. Does anybody have any questions on anything that we covered today? It's pretty self-explanatory for the most part, but make sure you study it. It is going to be on the test along with everything else. It is a very important part of learning. Remember, we have 4 different types of learning: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, cognitive learning, like book learning, and then we have observation/imitation. Okay, anybody need more time on this? Voila. Who's got questions? Anything you want to ask me? Anything you want me to go back over? How do you guys feel about this unit on a scale of like 1 to 10? Just show me with fingers. A 9, 8, 7.5. All right, so we're feeling pretty good. Study over the weekend, you guys will be up to a 9 or 10. Does anybody have specific questions you want me to go over? You guys want to play a review game for candy? Okay. All right. So folks at home, that's going to do it for us. Please make sure you bring questions to class. I will do my best to answer those questions. Or if anybody wants to come in and see me at lunch tomorrow, if you come up with questions, you're welcome to swing by. And that's going to do it for us.